The first day of an autumn cruise from Le Havre up the Seine to Paris was a trip by bus to the World War II invasion beaches of the Normandy coast. This map shows the route the buses followed. First, a few miles on broad highways on either side of a bridge across the Seine. Then a slower progress on narrow roads lined at intervals by the 2- and 3-story houses of small villages, and an occasional encounter in an awkward location with a car coming the other way. After some 85 miles on the road, we reached the coastal town of Arromanches, where there is a museum dedicated to the story of those landings, the men who fought there, and their leaders. Here are pictures of 4 of the many exhibits. To me, the most interesting of the presentations was a short movie about 2 artificial harbors codenamed Mulberries. In the bay at Arromanches are scattered remnants of one of these harbors. See the cormorant stretching his wings at the right end of one of the massive concrete blocks, and the close-up of the moorings to keep off. I decided to learn more about the harbors, went back home, and did so. This slideshow movie is a summary of what I gleaned from the net and from books about these temporary harbors. Their constituents were built with great secrecy in the 5 months before D-Day. Great pains were taken to hide construction work from the Germans. Although at least 25,000 workmen were employed, the concealment seems to have been effective. It involved a false end use and destination for each element. And as a part of this cover-up, in addition to the code name Mulberry for the project, each of its 7 major components had a code name too. They are listed here. As you see, the code names are entirely arbitrary and unrelated. But on this slide, their meaning is clearly defined. This slide pictures 4 unassembled components of the artificial harbors. In the center is an unloading dock flanked by a tug. Around it are 4 floating caissons, and in the lower right, a segment of a pier, the runway to shore, resting on 4 of its supporting pontoons. But now, to the nitty-gritty of the story. Here is a sketch showing the layout of the British-operated Mulberry B at Arromanches. There were 3 entrances to the port: west, north, and east. The first aerial photo looking southwest from the north entrance identifies the main components of the artificial harbor. The principal barrier to waves were huge reinforced concrete floatable caissons placed in rows at strategic locations. They were enormous, 230 feet long by 65 feet wide, as may be seen in this photo of one under tow. The projecting flanges at the end allowed it to be joined securely to another caisson. They were made in 6 heights, ranging up to 70 feet, to match the depth of water in which they were to be sunk by flooding air-filled compartments. This blurred shot shows the angled setup of caissons on the south side of the east entrance. To complete the north wall of the harbor, some 30 ships were sunk to fill gaps between rows of caissons. Here are some of these ships. All were sunk in relatively shallow water. Some accounts report that their holds were filled with cement. In fact, many were refloated and returned to commercial service after the artificial harbor was abandoned in November 1944. Both ships and caissons were protected to some degree by breakwaters, several hundred yards seaward of them. This is a section of a broken segment of these massive cross-shaped steel breakwaters, 25 feet high by 200 feet long. And here is a photo of two of these code-named bombardons in floating position. The lower portions were water-filled and submerged, leaving, as you see here, a 5-foot wall of steel to break up waves. They were attached to each other by hemp cables that spanned the 50-foot gap between bombardons. Many of these connections were severed during the storm on 22nd June that destroyed Mulberry A, some 12 miles farther west at Beerville. Still intact, some of the caissons there were moved to Mulberry B later. End of Mulberries Part 1. Go to Part 2.